Welcome back to the show. I am really excited about your new book. It's a personal interest of mine. But tell the audience what you're doing with this book, what you hope to achieve. I mean, America's a mess, and you seem to have a solution for us as individuals. And I want to learn more.
David, thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here today. The book is appropriately called The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation. So over the last 5 years especially, but maybe 10 years or so, I've gone through the same pain and anguish that most friends over politics. I've been listening to the news and wanting to pull my hair out. I've been banging my head against the wall, just like everybody else. And so as I was kind of learning how to cope with this current political landscape, I decided to write a book to help other people cope with the same fractures that we're all dealing with.
Oh, I mean, are you like me? It's every 4 years. I hope that we'll have a better choice for president, and the campaigns will be less toxic, and they'll be more about solutions instead of all this other garbage. And every 4 years, it just amazes me. It gets worse.
It does get worse. I feel exactly the same way. It makes me sick to my stomach. I wish we could have a law making it only 3 months, a campaign season only 3 months long, or maybe 6 months. I can't stand it. It starts basically 2 years before the election. You're right. I get nauseous just thinking about it.
Yeah, and it's not only the time frame; it's just how mean people are to one another. And like when they had the debates, mainly Trump was behaved terribly, but also Biden had his moments where he was rude and name calling or whatever. And the narrators are asking these questions, and then they kind of talk off any way they want. It's like, geez, as voters, we just like to know, what are you going to do? But I think in your book you seem to talk about some other things. I think you referred to it as what was it, a self-help book?
Yeah, I think it's the first political self-help book. So how do we cope with this political environment?
Well, I think it's a great thought, because it's we have to find a way to cope, because if we don't get this thing under control pretty soon, everything's over. So what are you trying to teach us to do? I mean,
So politics has really taken a larger than life portion of most of our minds. One of the first chapters in the book says politics is the new religion. And the word religion, I'm not using exactly, it's more a metaphor. A religion is kind of a way of life. And for many people, sports is their way of life, or Christianity is their way of life. But for a lot of people now, politics has become their way of life. It is the prism for which they see everything in life. So like you, I've been shocked over the last year or two how everything's political and everything is personal. Snowstorms in Texas, the pandemic, wearing a mask or not a mask. Why is all these issues that would never have been political 20 or 30 years ago, why is everything political now? And so politics for many of us has become our new religion, our new obsession.
well, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons that could be a piece to the puzzle on why politics has become this new religion is that it enables people in power, the elites, which I call them the elites, the wealthy, the politicians, the bureaucrats, whatever, to control us better. I mean, I don't want to go conspiracy theory. That's not where I'm going. But you think about, if they isolate us, you thinking of any war strategy. If you isolate, then you can divide, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. So yes, there's a really great quote. I'm gonna see if I can find it real quick, put my hands on it, because I know exactly the right quote to use at this point in time. Yeah, here it is. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. And so that is what both politicians are doing, and also our media is doing.
Yep.
As it turns out, fear and outrage is incredibly addictive. So when we
And
are
profitable.
outraged, sorry,
And profitable.
exactly right. So what politicians and media, when I say media, by the way, that is a really huge term. It does mean cable, internet, radio, podcast, TV. It also means social media. So anywhere that you're consuming content, what they discovered is when people are outraged and when people are fearful, they will spend more time on those screens. And the more time on screens, the more advertising you consume, and the more advertising you consume, the more money they make. So, by the way, this is not something that they don't know is happening, but the major media networks are literally making money by keeping us afraid and keeping us divided, and it's intentional.
Oh yeah, yeah, and the messaging also, part of the fear is we're not good enough.
Mhm.
That plays into it. But this whole fear thing, the other thing, if we go back to the religion analogy, and I do agree, now I am a follower of Jesus, and that's my deal, and I respect people if they have other beliefs, no problem at all. But the whole religious thing, I think, makes sense because religion is like a habit.
Mm.
And I talked to you about, I like to bring America back to three common values, and the first one being courageous, good character wins. Well, the first underlying virtue that I have under there is faith,
Mm.
because I believe the first aspect really of courageous, good character is faith, and because faith then defines the second virtue, which is truth.
Mm.
And we have to really find what's true, and we have to respect there are absolute truths. And if politics is your religion, is your faith,
Mhm.
then you then get manipulated by your emotions and your
Mhm.
fears wherever they want to drive you. And I've seen it where people have it, that fundamentalist zealot mentality about politics, where their guy can do no wrong, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever you want to grab. Um, and it's pretty scary.
Mhm. Exactly. So what our brains are kind of built for is for mythology. So, the Greeks and the Roman kind of discovered that they have these large archetypes, and even things like wrestling. You have, let's use the more of the mythological ones. You kind of have your gods and your deities and your knights. And every single day, if you're paying attention to the news, you see these different salvos kind of going across, people shooting at each other. And we have gotten so attached to our political parties that we have a sense of identity and sense of status based on how well our tribe is actually doing. So we are very, very akin to having this kind of imprint of a good versus evil mythological battle that's fighting over here for our destiny. And we kind of curate these characters, and we have the pastors who come out and kind of describe to us and explain to us what's happening on the battlefield. We get the seers, who are the talking heads, who tell us what's going to happen in the future. And so these archetypes are already inside of our brain, and rather than looking them into a play or in a book, we get it played for us every single day in vivid color on the screens in front of us.
Yeah, and I think it's, some of my favorite, one of my favorite guys in the writings I read is John Eldredge. He's a Christian guy who writes about men be men type of thing, and he's not a zealot politically, okay, but he does say what you were just saying. He says one of the things that if you really want to develop your spirituality, in his case it's Christianity, is you have to understand we're at war.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the inherent things wherever we are in our particular belief systems, that we have a certain belief that this lifestyle or belief system is good,
Hmm.
but there's another bad one. Maybe it's
Hmm.
simply just unhealthy, like good food versus unhealthy food. Maybe it's not zealotry, but there's always a good versus bad. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is politics has moved so far to the extreme of emphasizing the division,
Yes.
where I remember, Ronald Reagan, you know, the great communicator. He had dinner with Tip O'Neill, the head of the Democrats, They could
Absolutely.
have a discussion. They totally disagreed on certain things, but they could enjoy each other's company and see what they had in common. And it's like, is that what your book is trying to get us to do on an individual level, is to get back to look at what's the good in the other person instead of, okay, where do we disagree?
Is exactly right. So we as Americans have been absolutely convinced that there's a war between Democrats and Republicans. When we've forgotten what it actually is, it's Democrat and Republican against our collective problems. And that's what you're describing there with Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They had a different approach, but they both wanted to solve the problem. So
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now, primarily our politics is not about solving our collective problems. What politics is really about right now is just beating the other side. That has become the point of politics. It is the end game. The end game is just to have power. So you can say, I'm the best, I'm the winning side, we are right, and you are wrong. And you're absolutely right. The media, what they've basically done is they have vilified the other side. And so, if ever you want to really indoctrinate somebody, one of the best ways to do that is to vilify the enemy. You give them a strong enemy, it taps right into our lizard brain, our midbrain, and we go right to tribalism. And then we come to start objectifying the other side. And we start calling names and slurs, and we start belittling them. And then it allows us to go and do increasingly horrible and atrocious things to the other side. And what's really odd is the other side is not nearly as radical as we've been convinced that they actually are. They're not nearly as radical as we've been convinced.
Well, and it's interesting what you say. I mean, just mentioning something. My wife was subscribing to the local email feed or whatever on Nextdoor, and she canceled it because people are so toxic to one another online,
Yeah,
like we've never seen before.
no,
I mean, she sent me one earlier well, late last week. I can't tell you what the guy said.
yeah.
It was so coarse.
Right.
And,
I get a great point on that.
you
So
know,
I think freedom of speech is one of our most sacred values. Really, really, really important. But when our founding fathers drafted that 250 years ago or so, they never imagined that speech would be disembodied from a person's identity. And when it happens when speech is disembodied from identity, is there is no ballast, there is no reputational risk, and people behave worse. So I really think that if anybody's going to be saying anything, we should know who that person is. So they
oh
actually
yeah.
suffer the consequences of lies or slander or slurs or anything else. I think today's social media environment where people can have uh, anonymous accounts is not healthy for us as a country.
No, I agree. And it's even crossing the realm of like this next door thing. I think they know who each other are.
Now, on
And
next door, you're usually anonymous.
oh, you
Just
are.
neighbor,
Okay.
neighbor one, neighbor two. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I've
Because
seen it too. And I shake my head and I wonder, it's not valuable for me anymore because I don't want to see that.
no,
It's not
no.
useful
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. We just canceled it. So tell me. So let's say I'm a person who wants to be a better person. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just start there. What
Okay.
what do I need to do?
Yeah. So, the first thing is this is that, most people who are probably listening to this podcast right now are going, yeah, I can think of somebody right now who really needs to read this book. They are really out there that they need the help. Just so you understand, if you're trying to fix somebody else, you're pointing in the wrong direction. This is about us getting better. One of my favorite quotes, you may have heard it before. It's much easier to fool somebody than to convince them they've been fooled. And as was said by Mark Twain. Have you heard that quote before?
Yeah, but I've forgotten it until you
Yeah.
brought it up.
So it's much easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled by Mark Twain. And most people who hear that go, oh my gosh, oh, that is so true. Now, here's what's amazing about that is the first thing is Mark Twain didn't say it. It sounds like a Mark Twain quote, and it's quoted all over the internet, but he didn't even say it. So you've already been fooled, but most people think that he actually said it. Second thing is that convincing somebody else that they're wrong really has very little value to you. So we get in these arguments over politics with family and friends and coworkers, and we have a sense inside of us, well, if I can win this argument, if I can tell them how they're wrong, and they'll be better, and then my life will be better. Just so you know, changing somebody else's mind has next to little, if any, value to you at all. And the third thing is this, is that I wake up every single morning knowing that half of what I believe is not true. So I know I've been lied to. I know I've been misled, and my job is to figure out where I'm wrong about things. Because figuring out what somebody else is wrong, it doesn't help me. Uh, the tenet I use for that is, never believe what you think. So, I will believe things, but I kind of hold on to those beliefs loosely. All of my knowledge is very temporary, pending new evidence. Everything is malleable to changing to whatever is the latest, most true thing. So, this tenet here, how do you help yourself? Stop focusing on other people, and you worry about you. Changing your mind is far more valuable to you.
Oh yeah. No, you always have to start with yourself. And do you know Greg Kokel? He's down in your area.
No, I don't think I know him.
So Greg Kokel, he runs an organization called Stand to Reason. It's an evangelistic organization, but I actually teach his method
Yeah,
for leadership
yeah,
and for conflict resolution because the core of his method is not to change anybody's mind.
right.
He simply uses what he calls the Columbo questions
Hmm.
from the old Columbo TV show. And he says, so what he'll ask somebody when they'll make a statement or they have something on them that says something that he may not agree with or believe is
Yeah,
true, he'll say, so what does that mean? And he just asks that question and maybe ask some follow-up questions along that line. And once again, he's not getting them to change. He's not getting in their
hmm,
face.
right.
Just what does that mean? And he's sincerely interested.
Yep.
And then he follows up with his final question. He says, "Oh, why do you believe that's true?"
Hmm.
And then he just leaves.
Hmm.
And he says, if all I'm trying to do is put a pebble in their shoe, so they think about it because it irritates them, and they maybe start thinking that there's a different conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's not confrontational, it's not angry, it's sincere, it's empathetic, but he's able to start a dialogue that way. But first, as you brought up, you can't do that until you deal with yourself first.
Yeah.
So we need your self-help book to deal with ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. And by the way, as soon as you ask that question, as soon as you go into a conversation and you say, "Well, I'm not going to change somebody's mind," you have changed yourself. You've
Yeah.
stopped trying to fight this battle that you cannot win, and it only divides you from your family and your friends and your coworkers and fellow Americans. We all know, we've all learned from the past 5 years that trying to change somebody else's mind absolutely doesn't work. I mean, I hate. I don't want to say never works, but it's as close to never as possible. It
Yeah.
just never works. If you really want to change somebody's mind, the strange thing is the last thing you can use is facts, arguments. Those things don't work. The best way to change someone's mind is a great empathetic conversation, like you were suggesting, or relationships. If you want to
Yeah.
change somebody's mind, spend more time, quality time with them. You will have a better chance of changing their perspective on things.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, even if you look back, I'm sorry to mention another thing spiritual, but even if you look back when Jesus was teaching, he said, people will know you by how well you love them.
Mm,
Know you're my disciples by how well you love them. If you don't love them, they're not going to believe in me. And
mm,
I think about you're talking about politics, Peter, which I totally agree. But this applies across the board. I mean,
mm,
if I have an exercise program I think is better than yours,
yeah,
am I going to convince you by hammering it into you, or am I going to convince you by developing myself into a healthier person that shows you my program is effective?
right.
Same thing with a diet,
Hmm.
same thing with a way to do whatever you want to do. I
Hmm.
mean, you have to show people, not
Yes.
tell them, right?
I totally agree with you. Completely and totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So, what's really amazing is that we have been convinced that there is another side, which I don't buy in, by the way. That really is a psychological choice. You have to decide there is another side that you're fighting against. We've been convinced the other side is wildly different than us. But the truth is, we're not nearly as divided as we think. So, when Pew and both Gallup do a lot of great polling to see what people feel about things like gun control and abortion and climate change. And it turns out on a majority of issues, we have between 60 and 70%, or even 75% agreement on most policy issues. But what happens is we usually don't talk about policy. Normally, what most of us do is we really are arguing over talking points. So, we could look at any major news story that's been politicized, and these talking points kind of get disseminated, kind of from the top. Then they go through the anchors, the networks. Then they go to the radio stations. Then they go to the newspapers. Then they go to social media, and then they start coming out of our mouths. So, I'm not asking you this, but I could say, what do you think about Black Lives Matter? And you might put out a talking point, which actually is a tribal badge, which tells me which tribe you belong to. And I
That's
would
right.
come out with my talking points, which counteract that. And even though those things are verbal, those are kind of the equivalent of wearing a biker jacket. So it's verbal, but it signifies which tribe you belong to. And because you use a different set of talking points than I do, we basically want to go to war. In our very, very ancient brains, I believe, oh my gosh, you are my enemy, and I have to dispose of you, or kind of this fight or flight. So that mechanism still exists in our minds. Thankfully, we're a lot more civil, and we don't start throwing spears at one another, trying to kill each other when we see someone from another tribe. But that's the firing mechanism going off. But at the end of the day, there is massive agreement on most issues when it comes across to policy in this country.
But am I understanding you correctly, Peter? A lot of this agreement is masked by the fear. So the fear that I'm going to lose out,
Mhm.
I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do, or this person's going to hurt me if
Yeah.
their talking point passes.
Yeah.
So what happens in that environment, it seems, is with the blinders on,
Hmm.
okay, we no longer see over here and start a conversation about what we have in
Hmm.
common because all I'm looking at is what I'm afraid of
Hmm.
because
Yes.
I'm being indoctrinated constantly by all these, as you put it, where we get our content, I think, or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Wherever we're getting our content is reinforcing our fears.
Yes. Yeah. So we think that we have these very unified brains that kind of work completely in unison, and we don't. We actually have these different segments of the brain that get activated. So when you and I right now, we're using a lot of our prefrontal cortex. There's a lot of executive functioning going on, and we're both very focused on one another. There's a lot of empathy happening right now. We're really trying to connect. And if we start talking about a political issue, it's very possible it could go right past our frontal cortex, just completely bypasses it, goes into the midbrain, which is our oldest and most ancient part of the brain, and immediately fires up and says fight or flight. And at that point in time, we are completely in fear or enraged, and all logic is now gone. And so you're absolutely right. Fear bypasses our executive functions, gets us fired up, and then we can't have a rational argument anymore, or a rational discussion, rational discussion anymore. And also, we do attach our own psychological status to our tribes. So that's even makes it even worse. So we look at our tribe and we think of it as a zero sum game. We think, well, there's only so much of this of the pie, and in order for you to get more, I have to give something up. And I don't think the country is a zero sum game in any ways, but that is the constant message. Look what they want. They're taking away. Here's some magic words, by the way. These words go straight to our midbrain. They don't even allow us to reason anymore. They're going to take away your guns. They're taking away your freedom. They're taking away your religion. They're taking away your kids from school. Those ideas like that are so primal for us, we can't even reason. We just go straight into anger. That's why you've seen school board meetings and city hall meetings where people are going berserk because they use those words that really trigger us very, very quickly.
Yeah, and the other side of that is that there are some alarming things going on in our schools and in our other, other places. But I don't want to go there so much as you're talking about a second civil war.
Mm,
What does that look like? And at what point are people going to start grabbing their spears
mm,
or their guns or their knives? Because it seems like I don't know, I've seen some statistics talking about escalation of certain types of violence
yes,
that's happening.
it is happening. Yeah.
And the flip side of that is we have an unprecedented attack on law enforcement
Hmm.
where law enforcement they're either arresting people and judges won't prosecute or
Mm,
district attorneys won't prosecute, they let them go, or they're under such attack themselves, they're quitting.
hmm. Yep.
And then we have, other we have police departments that don't even have as many police officers as they used to have, because they fell for these excessive pensions, and now they're paying for pensions of police officers that aren't even working anymore, so they don't have as much money. And so you have all these things happening where we're having fewer and fewer people in law enforcement
Hmm.
at a time when violence is potentially escalating.
Hmm.
What do you see happening in this second civil war?
So our first Civil War was the issues were very, very clear. It was state versus federal rights and slavery versus abolition. There was, there was those lines were very, very clear. And what's interesting when we look at this Civil War, the lines are kind of blurred. It really isn't about a clear-cut issue like that. It's basically, I can't live with the other side. Those people are crazy, or they're living in a completely different reality, and that may be part of it. So the first Civil War was between these two different factions. They actually had two different governments. It was two different land bases, and they also, it was a very, very hot war. So a hot war is anytime you see physical violence, guns, bats, clubs, airplanes. Those are hot wars. And a cold Civil War is anything that's not violent, like we had with Russia. And right now we are in a cold social civil war, a cold social civil war. I mean, I've called both the Republican and the Democratic Party, and I asked their PR's team, do you want to see the other party decimated? Do you want them to go away? And they said, no. A healthy democracy has at least two parties. We need the other side. So the two parties are not trying to abolish the country of the other side. So who is this war between? It's between husbands and wives and parents and children and friends and colleagues. It's where we are shunning each other. We are shaming each other. We are not socializing with one another, and we're distancing ourselves from our friends. So it's definitely a cold war, and that's where most of us are really feeling it. And we're seeing flashes of hot war. And that's where you see a riot or a protest or a bombing or a shooting of some sort, and it's over a political motive. And those are on the rise. Most historians say that in order to have what's considered a hot civil war, you have to have about 1,000 deaths per year. I think the number is completely and totally arbitrary, but it's about 1,000. And last year, I think we had about, it was 50 or 60 last year. I think we're on pace this year for more than that, based on riots, protests, bombings, things like that. So it's really disheartening. Do I ever think we'll have two different standing armies actually going to battle on a battlefield? No. I think we'll continue to see an escalation of friend against friend, the social Cold War, or people not getting promoted, or people getting fired because of their political beliefs, or not getting hired because of their political beliefs. And we'll see continuing hot flashes through different acts of violence.
Is it possible that instead we would actually have more like a gang warfare going on, where we have 43 different groups, each with a different agenda, all battling each other, trying to be the top dog?
I
And
don't know. I don't know. So the business of our country is business. An American business, if you notice, the last 2 or 3 years has, with a couple minor exceptions, has stayed out of politics. We have managed through a pandemic and a very tumultuous presidency. And I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with President Trump. I'm saying it was tumultuous. American business persevered. Our economy persevered. And so what's amazing is, we might real violently disagree with the supporter of the other side, but we still do business with them. So the dollar is an amazing cooperative mechanism. It still allows for commerce to happen. It's really hard to imagine people or business leaders allowing us to descend into such chaos that business doesn't continue. It's a very, very strong ballast right now on our country, because it has been largely running fairly well despite a pandemic.
okay, so where do we go? What's your book telling? I mean, a self-help book. What are some of the key tenets and that you're telling people they need to do to repair these relationships and
Mm.
avoid this second civil war?
Yeah, that's the part that causes me the most pain. I've got so many stories of friends and family who have, had people be, screaming at them. They're having fist fights, defriending, people, mothers and fathers who are alienated from their children. That's what really breaks my heart. I like having people unified and in relationships.
Yeah.
So, first of all, we've got to realize that each person's reality is a construct. So my reality is a construct. My reality, my perception of reality is not reality. So if you don't like your reality, you just change the construct, which means you change the inputs that are coming in. So I have completely and totally turned off the news. I haven't watched the news now, I think in 6 months, maybe a little longer than that. That means no cable, no radio, no TV. On my social media feeds, I've turned off all the news of things that I followed. I don't follow any news. Now, what's the research tells us is that you're actually, the more news you consume, the more misinformed you are. Now, you might think that's like completely contrary. No, the more news you consume, you're more misinformed, not informed. And you might look at me and go, Peter, well, you're completely unaware. No, I actually still hear about it. I get the headlines. I heard, a little while ago, my wife told me Bill Cosby got off. Okay, well, now I know that after serving less than 3 years. I don't need to go much deeper than that. If I need to know the weather, I look at an app on my phone. If I want to know traffic, I go look at Google. I'm still aware of the major things that happen without being completely flooded with senseless, meaningless hate and slur and slander against other people. It doesn't help me any.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. I years ago I talked to a guy who was a big Republican fundraiser in California. And I was talking about media, and he said, "You got to understand, Dave." He said, "Whatever media you read has a bias.
Mm-hmm.
So choose a media that you agree with, you know, and as long as it's not, he didn't add, but you and I have discussed, you don't want the extreme one,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's going to, add their, embellish." So, and I agree with you. I do the same thing. I don't read, I read, I get a snippet from the Wall Street Journal on business stuff. I look at world news each day, which is a Christian reporting thing that typically reports on a number of things that are not covered by mainstream media, but they did have the Cosby thing, very brief article.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, oh, and I get something called 21 Hats, which is a guy, Lauren Feldman. He aggregates news from the main news. So I
Mm-hmm.
scan that, and
Right.
it's all business stuff.
Huh?
But that's really it, because I don't trust the rest of it. And it seems like, if I'm understanding you correctly, once again, going back, the mainstream media is basically going to try to fuel fears,
Correct.
whatever my fears may be.
Yes.
They're going to try to fuel those. So
Uh-huh.
I really don't want to go there.
Uh-uh. It doesn't help you.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
has no value for you. Yeah. So cutting off all of your news will actually make you better informed than when you consume too much. We made a choice as Americans back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Newspapers and magazines all said, hey, will you pay us subscriptions for our services, or will you go online and get news for free? And we as Americans, being as thrifty as we are, said, well, no, if I can get my news for free online, then I'm not going to pay for journalism anymore and pay for investigators and editors. And we now have what we deserve. Is we have not only cable, but internet, social media, and radio. And what they discovered is the best way to get our attention is to sensationalize events. How can they
Yeah.
make things as sensational as possible so we read their page, watch their show, listen to their radio station, so we are more enraged and we spend more time consuming it so they can sell more advertising? So I think you're absolutely right. Finding I pay for my media. That way I know that they're going to be getting less money from advertisers, and they're hopefully going to give me a much more less biased and more objective point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I pay an annual subscription to World. I pay $4 a month for Wall Street Journal. So nothing
Wall Street
big.
Journal's
And then
great.
I pay $100 a year for Harvard Business Review,
Oh yeah. Oh,
because I
they're
like the
great.
articles there, but
They're
that's not
phenomenal.
really necessarily news. But
Wow.
so you're saying less media. So what do we do next?
I'm sure the dates both of us. You probably remember the movie War Games, right? And do you remember the lesson of the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick? And he's like 16 years old. This is like, an eternity ago. All right, so the movie War Games, Matthew Broderick plays a 16-year-old high school student, and he hacks into some kind of Pentagon computer.
Oh
And his
yeah.
Pentagon computer has artificial intelligence, and it's basically there to simulate a nuclear war. And he breaks into this thing, and it starts going a little berserk, and starts threatening to actually launch a nuclear war against Russia. And there's a huge calamity around that. And at the end of the movie, the computer comes to realize that no matter how many times it simulates nuclear war with Russia, it loses. There is no scenario where we launched first or hit these certain targets where we actually won. And the lesson was the only way to win the game is not to play the game. So if you believe there's a civil war, if you are at war with your family, friends, or coworker, the only winning move is not to play the game. I don't believe there are two sides in this country. I am patriotic and an American first, and I love all of my Americans, and I'm choosing not to play the game. That is by far and away the best lesson that anyone can take to end the Civil War for themselves.
So what does that look like?
Well, I can have conversations with certain people over, news of the day and certain issues, but I'm no longer trying to battle for a side or for a point of view. I'm politically independent. I really think, I think, and I think I'm in the minority here. I don't think there's any benefit to us as a population for having a political affiliation. Now, I know here in California, people go, well, if I'm not affiliated with a political party, I can't vote in the primary. I know that it's a price that I pay living in California. I don't vote in the primary. And the reason I don't want a political party is as soon as you have a political party, as soon as you have that identity, it changes your perception of reality. It creates a bias in your mind. And a bias, by definition, is an error in logic. It is a mistake. So as soon as you say, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a socialist, I'm a libertarian, as soon as you do that, it creates a prism for how you see reality. It distorts it, and we kind of compartmentalize it in our minds. And all of a sudden now there is an other. If I'm a Democrat, then you are an other, you are a Republican. I am creating an other for me to be against.
But
And plus I'm distorting my view of reality. So next thing here is, I don't think you should have a political party. I really don't see the value. All it really does for you is indoctrinates you and narrows your scope of what reality actually is.
well, I don't know. I would take issue with that, Peter, because isn't not having a political party in essence having a political party? I mean, it's kind of like an atheist, that's their religion. So you're actually creating the same type of us versus them. I've walked away, I don't have it, versus someone who does, because I can tell you I'm a lifelong Republican, but I don't like the Republican Party and a lot of the things it stands for. But I mean, that's where I've chosen to sit, but it doesn't indoctrinate me. It doesn't change me necessarily. Isn't it kind of more how you live out that paradigm?
Where did you go to high school, David?
I went to high school in Marin County, California, just
Marin
across the
County.
Golden
All
Gate
right.
Bridge.
So I went to school, high school down in Pasadena, and through some kind of miracle, Marin County High School, wherever you went to high school, is playing Pasadena High School. You and I are friends, and we go down to the football game on a Friday night to see Marin play Pasadena. At the very, very last play, my high school, Pasadena, is on the 5-yard line, about to score the winning score. My quarterback goes back. He throws the ball. The receiver catches it. He falls right on the goal line. One ref comes over and says, touchdown. The other one comes by and doesn't know. I, being from Pasadena, immediately decide that we won the game. You, being from Marin, go, you guys didn't win. He didn't even say his hands were up. And that automatically, even though we haven't been to high school, and I know for me, it's been a long time, 30 years or so,
Yeah.
even though I really have very little loyalty, very little attachment to my high school, it still creates a tribal bias. So if you don't think that your party affiliation creates for you a bias, you are delusional about a bias.
Well,
It
but once
absolutely
again,
does. It's
once it,
part of our framework, whether we know it or not.
but once again, you're basically creating a generality, and you're lumping me in that generality. Whereas I can tell you at 64 years old, and I graduated from high school in 1975 from Redwood, where Gavin Newsom also graduated, although we would have different views on things, many things. If that happened exactly the way you described it at 64 years of age, which I think you said we're going at this time of life, but maybe if we were going, when I was in high school, I wasn't as mature. But at 64 years of age, my response would be, wow, that was an awesome game. I couldn't see it from up here in the stands. However it worked, it worked. It wouldn't
You
be an
so
upsetting or a
it was a
polarizing
generality.
event for
I
me.
didn't mean necessarily you and me, but most people will relate to that. And maybe it was our college football team or it was a pro football team. The point is we are incredibly tribal. It is our master bias and it changes perception of reality for us. And so if we think that we don't have a tribal allegiance and we don't distort reality based on our tribes, we do. Everyone does. I do it too. And so my tribal allegiance, by the way, is to America. It is to America as a whole, all 311 million of us, and not to any individual party. And so, yes, if you want to, my tribalism is toward America and not for Russia or for China or anybody else. That is the us them that I've used in my mind versus using parties.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that. And I think, isn't tribalism, I mean, isn't that something where there's something inherent in us where we want to be part of a group and we want to be
Yeah,
accepted,
right.
type of thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that what I've had to go through is that I went through a period of time in my life where I thought I knew all the answers. Now I realize no one else has ever gone through that phase, but I went through that phase for quite a while. And I now realize that, all I want is the best solution. That's my bias. That's my thriving passion. And I'm open to new information, just like you brought up. But I think, Peter, you and I are kind of in rare in that mode where our bias is, how do we find the best way to solve this versus how do I get my way, or how does my tribe win, or something along those, or even worse, I what do I do to get more power, or what do I do to get more profit? I think one of the things that concerns me about America today is that we are so driven by profit.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
can ruin the environment if there's profit. We can take
Mhm.
advantage of workers if there's profit.
Yeah.
We can violate these laws if there's profit. And it just goes on and on. I
Mhm.
think it's eating us up.
Yeah, I agree. So I love your principles and your virtues. And when we look at principles and virtues, what they really are is is a cost that we pay for the benefit of somebody else. So when you look at any virtue like courage, that was one of yours, for example, that might be where I'm sacrificing myself. I'm throwing myself under a grenade to save somebody else. Honesty, I think, is very beneficial to the person who's doing it, but also it can be a cost to say, I screwed up. It might be embarrassing. It might cost you money. You may have to go clean something up. So every value is a cost for the
Yes.
benefit of the collective. And so what you're sharing, what you're teaching with your principles and your virtues are really important because we need more leaders in politics and in politics and also in business who go, it's going to cost us more money to build a plant this way. It's going to cost us more money, but you know what? Our society and our air and our clean water has a benefit for it. So that's what values are: a cost for the benefit of somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So, talk to us about the book. Where can we get the book? And because people need to read through this and really digest what you have to say.
Oh, thank you so much for asking, David. It's available August 3rd on Barnes & Noble and also on Amazon. So it's Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Go to either one of those, search for The Civil War by Peter Montoya, and you will find it there.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for being with us, Peter. This has been a lot of fun. I'm sure you recognize I could keep going for another full day if you wanted to, if we're kicked back on a deck looking at the beach or something
I
like
would
that, or
love that. You
in
are
the
a
mountains.
great conversationalist, and I really love your values.
Yeah, well, I love what you're doing. I hope it has an impact because we need different people contributing here to try to bring us back to unity, as you emphasize a lot in your writings.
Hmm.
Unity and what do we have in common
Hmm.
versus where are we different? And that would be
Hmm.
so great. Thank you.
Thank you, David.